Part 2. Mid-Fire Month, 8th month, Day 26, 1858. The current house where Sebas resided was in an affluent neighborhood with high public order, even by the capital's standards. Although the size paled in comparison to the neighboring houses, it looked to be built so that 2 generations of families and their servants could live together. For only Sebas and Solution, the place was simply too large. Needless to say, they had a reason for renting such a large mansion. As long as they were disguised as the family of a wealthy merchant from a far-off land, they could not live in a shabby residence. That is why, with 0 connections and credibility, they had to put up with paying for the entirety of the lease at several times the market price. Having arrived at such a residence and entering through the front door, there was someone who was there to welcome him. Wearing a white dress, it was battle-maid Solution Epsilon, under Sebas's direct command. Although there were other inhabitants like the Shadow Demon and Gargoyle, they did not come to receive him because they were placed as guards. "Welcome back." Solution's words stopped along with her head in mid-bow. Her eyes were colder than usual as she stared at what was in Sebas's arms. "Sebas, sir, what is that?" "I've picked her up." Solution did not say anything to his short reply. However, the atmosphere grew heavy. "Is that so? Though it does not look to be a present for me, what are you planning to do with it?" "I'm uncertain. Could you first treat her wounds?" "Wounds, you say?" After looking over the girl's condition, Solution nodded her head, as if convinced, and stared at Sebas. "Then could you not have dropped her off at the temple?" "But of course. Truly, the thought must have escaped me." Solution narrowed her eyes and stared coldly at Sebas, who would not even give an inch. For the briefest of instants, their eyes locked, and the one who looked away first was Solution. "Shall I throw it out?" "No. Since I already went through the trouble of bringing her here, we may as well come up with a way to put her to good use." "Understood." Solution was never one for many expressions, but her current face was truly like that of a mask. Even Sebas could not recognize the emotion that was filling her eyes, only that she did not at all welcome the current situation. It was a truth so obvious you could almost touch it with your hands. "First, could you perform a diagnosis of her physical condition?" "Understood. I will do so immediately." "No, right here is a bit—" Although Solution might have deemed it trivial, it probably wouldn't do to have that done at the entrance. "We have an empty room, so may I ask that you perform it in there?" Solution nodded without a word. There were no more words spoken between them as the girl was moved from the entrance to the guest room. Although neither Solution nor Sebas were the type to partake in needless chatter, even more so, an ambiguous atmosphere flowed between them. Solution opened the guest door room since Sebas was using both hands to carry the girl. Despite the thick curtain darkening the room, the air did not feel stuffy in the least. The air was fresh because the door had been opened many times, and the interior kept immaculate. Sebas stepped inside, small rays of moonlight shining through the slips in the curtains. He laid the girl on top of the bed's clean sheets. Although he tried his best to heal her by pouring in his kai, the unmoving body looked like a corpse. "Then—" Solution nonchalantly tore off the cloth wrapped around the girl, revealing her ragged limbs. Though it was a cruel appearance that should have invited pity, there was no change in Solution's expression. Her eyes reflected nothing but dull indifference. "Solution, I leave the rest to you." Sebas left her with only these words and exited the room. Solution did not stop him, but began to check the girl's condition. After stepping out into the hallway, Sebas quietly murmured to himself so that it would not reach Solution's ears. A foolish endeavor. Sebas unwittingly stroked his beard. Why did he save her? He himself could not explain clearly. Perhaps this is what it meant for a hunter not to slay a bird that came to him of its own accord. No, that wasn't it. Why did he save her? As the butler, who was also tasked with the role of house steward, his allegiance was with the 41 Supreme Beings. At present, his guild leader, the one who took on the name of Ainzul Gon, was the being whom he owed the entirety of his allegiance to. There was not even a shadow of falsehood in his loyalty. He believed that he had always served diligently, and would not hesitate to lay down his life in service. However, if he had to pledge his loyalty to only one among the 41 Supreme Beings, Sebas would choose without hesitation. Touch me. He was Sebas's creator, and the strongest existence in Ainzul Gon, holder of the world champion class, and in a different league altogether from the others. As part of the first 9, he gathered the original members of Ainzul Gon before it grew in power through every possible means, including PK. No one believed it if he was told that his reason was to help the weak. However, it was the truth. He helped Momonga when he was about to quit the game in frustration from being PK'd continuously. When Simmering Teapot could not find a party to adventure with because of her appearance, he was the one who approached her first. The thoughts that person left behind became the invisible chains wrapping around Sebas. Could this be a curse? What vile words. If a different person from Ainzul Gon, a member of Nazarick created by the 41 Supreme Beings, had heard him, he might have been called a blasphemer and been attacked. Feeling pity for a being who is not of Nazarick is unacceptable. That expression was most obvious. With a few exceptions, those whose settings were established to be such by the 41 Supreme Beings, head-maid Pestonia S. Wanko, for example, excluding people like her, the members of Nazarick all believed that those who did not belong with Ainzul Gon should immediately be cast out. For instance, he had heard from one of Solution's reports that a member of Battle-Maid Pleiades, Lupus Regina, was on friendly terms with a girl from Carne Village, but he knew very well that depending on the situation, Lupus Regina would abandon her without a second thought. It was not because she was heartless. An order from the Supreme Beings to die meant that you must die. Likewise, even if she was a friend, an order to kill her would be carried out swiftly. That was true loyalty. A fellow denizen who did not understand this would be looked on with pity. Judging humans with useless sentiment, that in itself was unacceptable. Then what about him? Was his current course of action acceptable? As Sebas bit his lips, Solution walked out through the door. Her face was emotionless, per usual. How is she? On top of syphilis, she has 2 other venereal diseases. Several of her ribs are cracked, as well as her fingers. The tendons in her right arm and left leg have been severed, and she is missing her top and bottom front teeth. It appears that her internal organs are failing as well. There are lacerations in her anus, and it is possible that she is addicted to some drug. She has countless contusions and cuts on her body. Considering her current state, I believe that I can leave out the rest. Would you like me to explain further? No, there is no need. There is only one thing that is important. Can she be healed? Of course. Sebas had expected her prompt answer. Using a healing ability could fix even amputations. If Sebas were to use his Qigong, it would also be easy to completely fix her bodily injuries. In truth, if he wanted, he could have easily healed the old woman's sprained ankle on the spot. He did not do so in order to save it for emergencies, and to prevent leaking information. But even if Qigong helped recover one's strength, it could not heal poisons or diseases. Sebas had never learned such skills. That was why he needed Solution's help for the recovery.
"Then I will leave it to you."
"Would it not be better to call for Lady Pistonia for healing magic?"
"That will not be necessary. Solution, I believe you have a healing scroll?"
Confirming that Solution nodded her head, Sebas continued.
"Then please use that."
"Sir Sebas, this scroll was given to us by the Supreme Beings. I believe that it should not be used on the likes of humans."
It was a reasonable argument. He had to consider a different method. First, heal her injuries and save her from the danger of death. They could then heal the poisons and diseases at a later time. However, he was not certain that they could afford to delay. If it were the poisons and diseases that were killing her, endlessly restoring her health would prove useless. After some hesitation, in the end, he spoke to Solution in a steely voice that would not betray his inner thoughts.
"Heal her."
Solution's eyes narrowed, and at the same time something dark red stirred within her pupils. But that change could not be verified any further due to Solution bowing her head.
"I will carry out your order, restoring her to normal condition. In other words, will it be fine to restore her body to the state before the injuries were inflicted on her?"
Seeing Sebas give his affirmation, Solution courteously bowed her head.
"I will begin immediately."
"And once her treatment is finished, will you please fill the tub with water and bathe her? I will leave to purchase a meal."
There was no one in this residence who needed meals or could cook, and as long as they did not have any extra of the magic item that rendered meals unnecessary, the girl's meals had to be prepared.
"Sir Sebas, although it is easy to heal her bodily wounds, I cannot heal her mind."
Solution's words came to a stop, and after a brief pause she stared intently at Sebas and asked,
"I feel that calling Lord Ines will be the best way to heal her mind. Will you not do so?"
"This is not a matter significant enough to warrant contacting him. There should not be a problem even if we leave her mind as is."
Solution bowed deeply. She silently opened the door to the room and stepped inside. Sebas watched her go, and then slowly leaned his back to the wall. What to do about the girl? Once she's healed, while the man escapes, release her at a place of her own choosing. That was the best way. At the very least, it should be somewhere far from the capital. Releasing her here was both dangerous and cruel. It would be no different than not rescuing her in the first place. But for Sebastian, the butler of the great tomb of Nazarick, was that really the right course of action? Sebas breathed a heavy sigh. How comfortable would he feel if he could expel everything that was mounting in his mind, just like this sigh? But nothing had changed. His mind fell into confusion, and his thinking was filled with noise.
Foolish. All because of one human.
Rather than asking questions he could not answer, he had to start simple. Although it would only serve to buy him time, from his point of view, this was the best course of action in his current situation. Solution changed the shape of her skinny fingers. They grew longer and transformed into tendrils that were about a few millimeters thick. Originally, Solution was a formless slime and could drastically alter her outer appearance. Something like transforming the tip of her hands was simple. She glanced over at the door, and having keenly sensed that Sebas's presence had disappeared outside, quietly walked over to the girl lying on the bed.
"Since Sebas-sama has given his permission, I will finish this bothersome task as quickly as possible. That would be in your best interest as well. You probably will not even be awake through it."
Solution spread her palm and pulled out the scroll that she kept stored in her body. This scroll wasn't the only thing Solution kept in her body. On top of consumable magic items like the scroll, she also had various weapons and armor. Considering that she could easily swallow several humans, something like this was not out of the norm. Solution stared at the unconscious girl. She had no interest in the girl's appearance. Rather, only one thought crossed her mind. This human did look tasty. The empty shell of a body did not seem like it would thrash around very much, even if she were to melt it with acid. Though I could understand his actions if he wanted to give this to me as a toy after it recovered. Knowing his personality, she knew he would not allow it. Aside from when they were attacked during their travels, Sebas, the boss of the battle-made Pleiades, would never permit feeding on humans. If the Supreme Being had ordered that the girl be saved, I would have no choice but to accept it. But are the likes of humans truly worth saving, even at the cost of a valuable treasure granted by the Supreme Being? Seba shook her head and thought out loud. I may just devour you before Seba-sama returns. She released the seal and opened the scroll. The magic contained within it was Heal, a Tier 6 healing spell that greatly restored health and removed bad status effects, like diseases. A normal scroll could only be used if the person possessed a class that could use the same branch of magic as the scroll. In order to use a scroll of a faith-based magic caster like a priest, one had to obtain a faith-based class. To explain further, the spell had to exist on the list of a learnable magic for that class. However, some thief-based classes had the skill that could disguise this list and deceive the scroll. As an assassin, Solution possessed several thief-based classes. It was why she was able to use the Heal scroll that she would normally be barred from using. First, put her into a coma, just in case. Then Solution used a skill to combine a powerful poison that induced sleep and a muscle-relaxing potion. She then moved to cover the girl's body. Mid-Fire Month, 8th month, Day 26, 1937. Sebas returned with the meal just as Solution stepped out of the room. She held a steaming bucket of water in both hands, with several towels in each bucket. The water in both buckets was dark, and the towels were dirty as well, showing just what sort of unsanitary conditions the girl had lived in.
You've worked hard. The recovery, it seems that it was completed without a hitch?
Yes, there were no problems. Only that there was no suitable clothing for her, so I changed her into whatever we had on hand. Is that acceptable?
Of course. It does not matter.
Is that so? The effects of the sleeping poison should have worn off by now. If there is nothing else, then I will take my leave.
Good work, Solution.
Solution bowed and walked past Sebas. Sebas saw her off, and then knocked on the door. Although there was no reply, he felt movement from within and quietly opened it. Inside, a girl was sitting up on the bed. She wore a vacant expression, as if she had only woken recently. She was truly unrecognizable. The dirty and withered blonde hair now shone with a beautiful luster. In that short amount of time, her sunken, scrawny face had been vitalized and regained its original appearance. Her once shriveled, cracked lips now shone with a pink glint. To describe her appearance as a whole, rather than calling her beautiful, it was more fitting to call her a girl who possessed an adorable charm. It was also easy to get a general idea of her age. Although she looked like she should be in her late teens, her hellish daily life gave her face a dignity that extended past her years. Solution had put her into a white negligee. However, it was of simple design, lacking the usual laces and frills that were the norm.
You should have recovered completely. But how is your condition?
There was no reply. Her vacant eyes did not show any signs of looking in his direction. However, as if he did not take that to heart, Sebas waited for her to speak. He did not expect much from her in the beginning. He had realized that her vacant expression was that of a person whose heart was no longer there.
Are you hungry? I've brought you a meal.
He had purchased it from a restaurant, bowl and all. The wooden bowl held a stew that was made from slightly seasoned meat broth. The oil added to the stew to accentuate its scent released a smell that stimulated the appetite. Her face moved slightly, responding to the smell.
Please, help yourself.
Sebas thought that she had not yet completely walled herself off in her own world. He held out the bowl along with the wooden spoon in front of her. Even when the girl did not move, Sebas did not try to force her. After a certain amount of time had passed, enough to make others feel anxious, the girl slowly moved her arm. Her movement was nervous, one that feared pain. Even if her injuries had been healed completely, the memory of the pain remained untouched. She held the wooden spoon and lifted a small amount of the stew. She then brought it to her mouth and swallowed. The stew was watery and thin. Sebas had intentionally ordered it to be prepared that way, thinly slicing 14 types of ingredients and cooking them for a long time, so that there would be no need to chew. Her throat moved, and the stew traveled down into her stomach. The girl's eyes moved ever so slightly. That tiniest of movements was the transformation from an elaborate doll to a human being. Her other hand moved, trembling as it accepted the bowl from Sebas. While carrying the bowl, Sebas moved it to a place where she seemed to want it placed. The girl stuck the wooden spoon into the stew, hugging the bowl closer to her with her other arm, and ate with an overflowing vigor. She ate so fast that if the stew had not been cooled to be just right, she would definitely have screamed out in pain from the burns. The girl did not even seem to mind that the chest area of her negligee was being dirtied by the stew trailing out of her mouth. It would have been more fitting to say she was drinking it rather than eating. After finishing the stew blindingly quickly, the girl drew the empty bowl close and breathed out a sigh. Having returned to humanity, her eyes shut heavily. The feeling of being full, the clean and soft clothes, the softness that had returned to her body, all of these synergized together to relax her mind and begin allowing her body to accept the feeling of drowsiness. But as her eyelids began to form a line, in the next moment the girl opened her eyes wide and cowered in fear. Perhaps she was scared to close her eyes, or maybe she feared that her current situation would vanish like an illusion. Or perhaps she had another reason. Sebas, who was watching by her side, could not tell. Perhaps she herself did not know the reason. That was why Sebas spoke to her, in a gentle voice, in an attempt to calm her.
Your body is seeking rest. Do not push yourself and sleep. I guarantee that you are in no danger here. You will still be in this bed when you open your eyes.
For the first time, the girl's eyes moved and stared directly at Sebas. There was barely any light in her blue eyes. No strength could be felt from them, only that they were no longer the eyes of the dead, but the living. Her mouth parted slightly and closed. She opened her mouth once more, and again closed it. This was repeated several times over. Sebas watched gently and did not try to pressure her. He merely stared in silence. At last the lips parted, and a tiny voice leaked through. The words that followed came quickly.
"Thank you."
Her first words were those of thanks, rather than questions about her current situation. Having caught a glimpse of her personality, Sebas smiled. Not the false one he wore so often, but a genuine smile.
Please, do not worry about it. Now that I have brought you under my wing, I will guarantee your safety to the best of my ability."
The girl's eyes widened slightly, her lips trembling. Her blue eyes grew wet and spilled teardrops. Then she opened her mouth wide and cried like something was releasing inside her. At last her curse spilled out, mixed in with the sound of sobbing. She cursed her own fate. She hated the one above who dealt her such a hand. She resented the fact that up until now no one had bothered to help her. That feeling of resentment then turned to Sebas. Why didn't he come to her sooner? Sebas's kindness. Because she was treated as a human, everything that she had been enduring all this time had come crumbling down on her. It would be better to say that because she regained her human heart, she could no longer endure all of those memories. The girl pulled at her head. With a tearing sound, strands of her hair were ripped free. Countless gold threads became entangled around her thin fingers. The bowl that carried the stew fell off the bed along with the spoon. Sebas watched over her madness without a word. Her resentment was sudden and clumsy. She was pushing herself. Depending on the person, he may have found her resentment offensive and raged at her. However, there was no anger in Sebas's expression. Instead, his wrinkled face carried something akin to benevolence. Sebas reached out and pulled her into his arms. Like a father hugging his child, an affectionate embrace with no ill intentions. Although her body momentarily stiffened, the embrace that was different from those of the men who lusted after her slightly relaxed her frozen body.
"It's okay now."
He softly patted her on the back as he repeated those words like a chant, like consoling a crying child. A hiccup, as if she were trying to cling to Sebas's words. The girl planted her face into his chest and cried even louder. However, that cry was different from the one from before. As time passed and Sebas's chest became completely damp with the girl's tears, the sound of her cries finally came to a rest. The girl slowly separated herself from Sebas and lowered her head in an attempt to hide her bright red face.
"I'm sorry."
"Please, do not let it bother you. It is a great honor for a man to lend his chest to a crying woman."
Sebas pulled out a freshly washed handkerchief and handed it to the girl.
"Please, use this."
"But it's so clean. If I—"
Sebas held the stammering girl's chin and raised her face. While the girl grew stiff as she wondered what was going to happen, he gently brought the handkerchief to her remaining tear marks.
"This reminds me. Solution just recently used message and had a long conversation with Shaltir. It seems she was boasting about how Lord Ainz wiped away her tears."
He wondered just what sort of situation would end up with Lord Ainz doing such a thing. He was unable to picture the image of Shaltir crying at all. Despite his confusion, Sebas did not stop his hands and finished wiping the tears from the girl's face.
There. Please, use it."
Sebas closed the girl's hand around the now slightly damp handkerchief.
"A handkerchief that cannot be used is a sad one indeed, especially one that cannot even wipe away a person's tears."
Sebas smiled and stepped away from the girl.
"Now, please, get plenty of rest. Let us discuss what to do from now on once you awake."
Because anything was possible with magic, her injuries were healed through Solution's treatment, and all of her mental fatigue was gone. That was why she should now be able to move normally. However, it was only a few hours ago that she was in hell. There was a concern that talking for too long might cause her mental injuries to reopen. In reality, like how she cried just recently, the girl's mind was still unstable. Although magic could temporarily heal her mind, it did not treat the root of the problem. Unlike bodily wounds, it was not possible to treat injuries that were not plain to see. Among the people Sebas knew, the one who could completely heal an injury of the mind was his master, and possibly Pestonia. Even though Sebas tried to get the girl to rest, she hurriedly opened her mouth.
"From now on?"
Sebas briefly hesitated over whether it was all right to keep conversing like this. But since the woman in question wished to talk, he decided to continue the conversation while keeping a close eye on her condition.
You would no doubt be too nervous to remain in the capital. Do you have a place that you can trust?
The girl lowered her face.
I see.
He did not bother to state the obvious. She did not.
This has become quite troublesome.
However, it was not as if they all had to take action immediately. The man from before would not be caught any time soon, and it should take some time for the search to arrive at Sebas's location. Although that might just be wishful thinking, he wanted to believe that there was no reason to panic. At the very least, not until the girl regained her health.
Then, let's see. First, could you tell me your name?
I'm Soiree.
Soiree, then. I still have not given my name. My name is Sebas Tian. Please call me Sebas. I serve the master of this mansion, Lady Solution.
That was their scenario. Although Solution wore the white dress instead of the usual maid uniform in case of sudden visitors, while the girl was here, it was necessary that she would have to maintain the role of master.
Lady Solution?
Yes, Lady Solution Epsilon. But I do not think that you will have many opportunities to see her. She is quite particular.
As if to indicate that he could say no more, Sebas closed his mouth. After a brief moment of silence had passed, he spoke again.
Now, rest for today. We can save the discussion for what you will do next for tomorrow.
Okay.
After confirming that Soiree had laid down on the bed, Sebas picked up the bowl that he had carried the stew in and left the room. When he opened the door, as expected, Solution stood outside. Although it was most likely to eavesdrop, Sebas did not go out of his way to admonish her. Solution as well showed no signs that the possibility she could be scolded even existed. That was why she simply stood outside without hiding her presence or her body. If she truly wanted to hide, an assassin class, she would have concealed herself more skillfully.
What is it?
Lord Sebas, in the end, what will you do with that?
Sebas directed his senses to the door behind him. Even if it was shut tight, it did not block out sound completely. Some of what was said here would be overheard. Sebas walked on with Solution wordlessly following him from behind. He stopped where Soiree would not be able to hear them.
You're talking about Soiree, I see. For now, I am planning to make the decision tomorrow.
A name.
She did not continue, but as if she had made up her mind, Solution opened her mouth once more.
Although it may not be my place to say, there is a very high chance that this thing will become an obstacle. It needs to be disposed of as soon as possible.
What did she mean exactly when she said disposed of? Hearing Solution's heartless words, Sebas thought that it was to be expected of her. This was Nazarick. For one who served the 41 Supreme Beings, it was the soundest way of thinking when it came to those who did not belong with Nazarick. Sebas's actions were what were strange in this scenario.
You are right. If she were to become an obstacle to Lord Ainz's orders, then she would have to be dealt with swiftly.
Solution looked at him strangely. It was a face that was asking why he had brought her in if he already knew.
She may prove useful to us. Since I've already picked her up, I need to think of a way to put her to good use, rather than simply throwing her away.
Lord Sebas, I do not know your reason for bringing that with you. However, those injuries imply a certain set of circumstances for that girl, and I doubt the ones who inflicted them will look kindly on the fact that this thing is still alive.
There will not be any problems on that front.
Do you mean you've already taken care of them?
No, that's not it. Only that should it appear that there will be a problem, I will use a certain method. That is why I wish for us to maintain appearances until then. Do you understand, Solution?
I will carry out your order.
As Solution watched Sebas walk away, she suppressed the small anger rising within her. Having been told as much by Sebas, her immediate superior, she couldn't speak out against him despite her numerous complaints, and if no problems arose, then it would be of no consequence if the matter was overlooked. But even so, how could he use the property of Nazarick on the likes of a human? Everything in the great tomb of Nazarick belonged to Ainzul Gon, and by extension to the Supreme Beings. Could using them without permission be tolerated? No matter how much she thought it over, the answer did not come. Lower Fire Month, 9th month, Day 3, 9:48. Sebas opened the door to the residence. He was returning from his usual duty of visiting the Adventurers Guild early in the morning to make note of the requests that had been put up before the adventurers could accept them. He recorded every piece of information on paper, even rumors circulating around town, and delivered all of them to Nazarick. Analyzing their contents proved quite difficult, and was left to the sages in Nazarick. He passed through the door and stepped inside the residence. If this was a few days ago, Solution would have been there to greet him. Instead...
Welcome back, Lord Sebas.
Currently, that task was given to the muttering girl wearing a maid uniform that extended all the way down to her feet. The day after taking in Soiree, they had held a discussion and decided to have the girl work at the residence. Although they could have had her stay as a guest, Soiree was against it. She did not want to be treated as a guest on top of having been given help. Even if it wouldn't be enough to repay them, at the very least she wanted to work. Sebas saw that the other side of her motive lay in anxiety. She knew very well her dangerous circumstances would soon bring a troublesome incident to the residence. She was trying her best to contribute so she would not be thrown away when that happened. Needless to say, Sebas had reassured Soiree that he would never abandon her. If he was going to throw out someone who had nowhere else to go, he would never have brought her with him in the first place. However, it was also true that he could never be convincing enough to heal the wounds of her heart.
"I've returned, Soiree. Were there any problems?"
Soiree shook her head. Different from when they first met, the white brim on top of her neatly cut hair wobbled.
There no problems.
I see. That's good.
The atmosphere around her was still dark, and her difficult expression remained unchanging. However, her voice sounded as if it was gradually growing louder, as if the thing that was eating away at her body was becoming undone, little by little.
Then the only problem remaining would be...
As Sebas walked onwards, Soiree followed beside him. To walk next to a butler, Sebas, her direct superior, was unacceptable behavior for a maid. But Soiree would be ignorant of maid etiquette, having never been educated as one. Sebas, too, had no intention of teaching her that lifestyle.
What is on the menu for today?
Yes, it's potato stew.
I see. I'm looking forward to it. Your cooking is delicious, after all.
At the words that Sebas spoke with a smile, Soiree grew bright red and lowered her face while squeezing her maid apron with both hands.
That's not true.
No, no. Of course it's true. It's quite fortunate, since I cannot cook whatsoever. But you are fine with the ingredients? Please tell me if you are missing something, or have something you wish me to buy.
Yes, I will check next time and tell you.
Although Soiree could not act normally in the house and with Sebas, she still showed an adverse reaction to the outside world. She could not handle any tasks that required her to leave the residence, and as such, jobs like procuring ingredients fell to Sebas. There was nothing lavish about Soiree's cooking. They were simple, home-cooked meals. For this reason, they did not need expensive ingredients, and the shopping could be taken care of quickly. Sebas, as well, was able to learn about many different ingredients and managed to acquire information on the foods of this world. He considered it killing 2 birds with 1 stone. All of a sudden, Sebas proposed an idea.
Shall we go buy them together?
Soiree's face registered great surprise. Then, growing frightened, she shook her head. Her complexion turned for the worse, and she began to sweat heavily.
No, I'm okay.
Sebas thought it was to be expected, and did not show any disappointment on his face. Ever since she started working, Soiree had never tried to do the tasks that required her to go outside. She locked up her terror by regarding this residence as the absolute castle walls that protected her. In other words, she was only able to move after drawing a line separating here and the outside, the world that hurt her. However, at this rate, Soiree would never be able to set foot outside, and they could not hide her forever. Considering Soiree's medical condition, Sebas knew that it was cruel to tell her to go outside after only a few days. The safer option would be to give her more time, so she could slowly adapt. However, that was for when they actually had time to spare. Sebas had no intention of settling down and spending the rest of his life in the capital. He would always be a stranger in this land, who was only here for information. If his master were to order that he withdraw... In preparation for that day, he had to impart her with various possibilities while he still could. Sebas stopped and stared directly at Soiree. She blushed and tried to lower her gaze, but he covered her cheek with his hand and raised her face.
Soiree, I fully know that you are frightened, but be assured that I, Sebas, will protect you. I will destroy any harm that may come your way. Soiree, place your foot forward. If you're scared, then I do not mind even if you have your eyes closed.
He grabbed Soiree's hand while she still hesitated, and spoke the words that he knew would be mean to her.
Do you not trust me, Soiree?
As time dragged on, a curtain of silence hung heavily over the hallway. Soiree's eyes grew slightly wet as she parted her rosy lips, revealing her pearl-like front teeth.
Lord Sebas is unfair. I can't refuse if you say like that.
Please, rest easy. Although I may not look it, I am quite strong. There are only a few apart from the 41 who are stronger than I.
Is that a lot?
Soiree giggled at the ambitious number, believing it to be a joke to console her. Sebas simply chuckled and did not answer. Sebas continued his stride. Although he knew that Soiree was stealing glances at his profile, he did not mention it. He knew that Soiree held some tender feelings for him, which could not quite be called love. However, Sebas felt that those feelings were something that was indoctrinated into her, like a feeling of reliance for the benefactor who saved her from that hell. Sebas was also an old man, and it was possible that Soare was mistaking familial love with the love between man and woman. And even if Soare ever truly loved Sebas, he had no intention of accepting her feelings. Not when he was hiding so much, not when their circumstances were so different.
"Then I will meet you after a few words with the lady."
"Lady, salute."
Soare's expression darkened slightly. Although Sebas knew why, he did not say it. Solution did not try to come in contact with Soare, and when she did, would only give her a passing glance before leaving without a word. It was to be expected that being ignored to such a degree would create a feeling of anxiety, and in Soare's case, great fear.
"It's all right. The lady has always been like that to everyone. She is not singling you out in particular, and I will only say it here, but the lady has quite a difficult personality."
As Sebas became overly talkative, the expression that was on Soare's face softened slightly.
"She becomes sulky if she sees a cute child."
"I'm not compared to her."
Soare hurriedly waved her two hands. Although it was true that Soare was pretty, she was still no match for Solution. However, what is beautiful and what is not differed for everyone.
"If I had to go by appearances, then you would be more to my taste than the lady."
That's...
As he gently looked at Soare's brightly lit face pointing towards her feet, his brows furrowed at her sudden change in expression.
And my body dirty."
Sebas breathed an inward sigh from seeing Soare's face make a complete change from before. He spoke while staring ahead.
"Jewels are like that. Those without scratches are considered beautiful and valuable."
Hearing his words, Soare's expression darkened in an instant.
"However, humans are not jewels."
Out of the corner of his eye, Soare slightly raised her face.
"It seems that you wish to keep telling yourself that you're dirty. But wherein lies a human's beauty? For a jewel, it can be appraised with certainty. But the beauty of a human being, what is the standard? Is it the average? The general consensus? If so, would the minority opinion be considered meaningless?"
After a brief pause, Sebas continued.
"Like how people have their own definition of what they consider beautiful, I believe that if a person's beauty lies separate from their appearance, it is not in their past, but in their heart. Although I do not know all of your history, from what I have sensed of your inner self these past few days, I do not consider you filthy in the slightest."
Sebas closed his mouth, and the world changed to one where the only sound was their footsteps. In the midst of it, Soare spoke with determination.
"If you think I'm beautiful, then please hug."
Sebas did not let her finish and embraced her.
"You are beautiful."
As he spoke gently, silent tears flowed out of Soare's eyes. Sebas softly patted her on the back to console her and slowly parted away.
"Soare, my apologies. The lady calls."
"Okay."
With a sad goodbye from Soare and her red eyes, Sebas knocked on the door and opened it, without even waiting for a response. As he closed the door behind him, he gave Soare, who was still glancing at him, a smile. Because the house was rented, despite having many rooms, there was barely any furniture. However, this room was decorated enough to not be embarrassed when accepting guests. but a person with a discerning eye would be able to recognize the lack of history and shallowness of the room.
"Milady, I've just returned."
Good work, Sebas.
The fake master of the residence sat on a lengthy sofa while wearing a bored expression. In reality, that expression was an act. Because of the presence of that outsider named Soiree, she was donning the foolish mask of a proud lady at all times. Solution moved her gaze from Sebas to the door.
She's left.
"It seems that way."
While scanning each other's faces, like usual, Solution was the first to open her mouth.
When will you drive her out?
This was what Solution asked every time they met, and just like every other time, Sebas gave her the same reply.
"When the time comes."
If it were like usual, the conversation would have been finished. Solution would sigh, and that would be it. However, today, Solution did not seem to want to leave it at that, and continued.
Could you clearly explain when this time you speak of will be? There is no guarantee that hiding that human will not lead to a troublesome incident. Will that not interfere with Lord Ains's will?
"There still has not been any incidents thus far. To think that you would panic because you fear what some humans might do, that is not appropriate behavior for one who serves Lord Ains."
A silence permeated between them, and Sebas breathed a small sigh. This was a very dangerous situation. Although there was no emotion on Solution's face, Sebas could feel that she was angry with him. Even if this residence was only a base of operations, Solution still considered it a branch of the great tomb of Nazarick. She could not condone the presence of a human who did not have her master's permission. Solution did not try to attack Soiree thus far because Sebas was firmly keeping her in check. However, if this continued, it would become impossible for him to control her in the near future. Sebas dwelled on the fact that he was running out of time.
Sir Sebas, if that human becomes an obstacle to Lord Ains's orders, then
she will be disposed of.
Sebas assured her, as to not let her finish the rest of her words. Solution closed her mouth and stared at Sebas with unreadable eyes, then bowed her head.
Then I have nothing else that needs to be said. Sebas-sama, please don't forget your words just now.
Of course, Solution.
However,
the emotion in Solution's mutter was strong enough to stop Sebas in his tracks.
However, Sebas-sama, is it all right to not report to Lord Ains about that thing?
Sebas fell silent a few seconds, then replied.
There will not be any problems. It would be discourteous to rob Lord Ains of his time for one human.
Entema and the others should be communicating with you via message daily at the appointed time. Could you not simply say a few words on the matter then? Are you intentionally hiding it?
Of course not. I would not do something like that to Lord Ains.
Then you are not acting out of your own self-interest?
The air became tense. Sebas realized that Solution had slightly readied herself into a stance. He understood just how dangerous of a position he was in. Every member of Nazarick pledged absolute loyalty to Ainsul Gon, and by extension the Supreme Beings. With the Guardians at the helm, it would not be an exaggeration to say that every single member was in agreement of that creed. Even the assistant butler Eclair, who wanted to conquer Nazarick for his own, was loyal to the 41 Supreme Beings and regarded them with respect. Needless to say, Sebas was one of them. However, he still believed that it was wrong to cast out a pitiable existence because of mere possibilities. Although, with that said, he knew also very well that the majority of Nazarick would not agree with him. No, he had only thought he had known. Solution's reaction revealed just how shallow his understanding had been. Solution was very serious. She was prepared to meet Sebas the butler, in other words, her superior in regards to daily workings of Nazarick, and one of the strongest in close combat, with force depending on his answer. He had no idea that Solution was prepared to go this far to erase the problem. Sebas showed a smile. From his smile, Solution's eyes looked at him strangely.
Of course not. The reason I am not reporting this to Lord Hines is not because of my own selfishness.
Then can you show the basis for your actions?
I hold her cooking skills in high regard.
Cooking, you say?
It looked as if question marks were hovering over Solution's head.
Indeed. And would it not appear strange to others if we were only two people living in this large mansion?
That is possible.
Solution had no choice but to concede on that point. Not having servants while living a life of luxury in a large residence would definitely appear odd.
I feel that at the very least we should have one servant with us. If we were to invite guests to the house, would it not seem suspicious if we cannot even serve them a meal?
In other words, you're using that human as part of our disguise.
That's right.
But there is no need for it to be that human specifically.
Soiree feels indebted to me. That means she would never leak information, even if she feels endangered. Am I wrong?
Very briefly, Solution thought it over, nodding soon after.
You are right.
That's how it is. There should be no need to ask for Lord Hines' permission if the matter is only regarding our cover. Not only that, he may even become angry and tell us to handle such matters on our own.
Sebas quietly asked Solution, who was remaining silent,
Do you understand now?
Yes.
Then this should be enough for now.
Sebas cut his words short. He had heard a sound like two hard objects colliding with one another. It was so subtle that anyone but Sebas might have missed it. The erratic repetition of the noise confirmed that someone was doing it on purpose. Sebas opened the door to the room and focused his senses toward the end of the hallway. They both froze, realizing that the sound came from the knocker at the front door. Since they first arrived in the kingdom, no one had ever knocked on that door. Any dealings they had were always done outside, and they invited no one to their residence. It was a desperate measure to prevent others from finding out that only two people were living in this large mansion. But today they had visitors. It would be more than enough to cause a troublesome incident. Sebas left Solution in the room and walked up to the entrance. He opened the cover of the prop-up window attached to the front door. What he saw through the hole was a man with wide shoulders, surrounded on both sides by the kingdom's soldiers. The man with the wide shoulders was dressed decently well. On his chest he wore a heavy crest that shone with the glint of copper metal. The healthy complexion of his face was padded with blubber, and he was remarkably fat, perhaps due to eating habits. And lastly, there was a man who seemed different from the rest. His skin was pale, like it had never been exposed to sunlight. With sharp eyes and gaunt cheeks, he looked like a bird of prey, like the scavengers that ravaged rotten carcasses. His black clothes hung loosely on him, making it obvious that he was hiding weapons. What irritated Sebas's sixth sense was the air of blood and grudges that hovered around him. They were truly a mismatched group, lacking cohesion. Sebas could not determine their identities or their objective.
Who is it?
I am Patrol Officer Stefan Heavish. The plump man at the very front revealed his name in a high-pitched voice. He was a patrol officer, a civil servant tasked with keeping public order, a position similar to the boss of a normal patrols that made their rounds around the city. Their duties included a wide range of categories. Because of this, Sebas could not predict why this man named Stefan had decided to pay a visit, and became troubled. Ignoring Sebas, Stefan continued to speak.
The kingdom has a law that bans the buying and selling of slaves. It was spearheaded by Princess Rainier, who dropped the plans which allowed it to pass. We received a report that the people of this residence may be holding this law in contempt, and have come to investigate.
He then finished by asking if he could step inside. Although Sebas thought of various words of rejection, denying them entry could escalate into a bigger problem. There was also no guarantee that Stefan was a real civil servant, despite the fact that the kingdom's civil servants did indeed wear the same crest as the one on Stefan's chest. That still was not an absolute guarantee. There was still a chance, although it was a great crime, that he was wearing a forgery. With all that said, allowing a few humans into the residence would not pose too big of a problem. If it came to blows, then Sebas could easily take care of them. In fact, it would be better if they were impostors. Gleaning something from the silence that formed while Sebas was thinking, Stefan opened his mouth a second time.
May I speak to the master of this residence? Of course, if the master is not present, then it can't be helped. But I don't think investigators going back empty-handed will be a favorable outcome.
Stefan smiled with a face that did not carry even a hint of apology. Hidden behind that expression was a threat, backed by the power of the law.
Before that, I have something I'd like to ask you. Who is the man standing behind you? His name is Succulent. He's a representative of the store that filed the report.
My name is Succulent. Pleasure making your acquaintance.
Seeing the faint smile on Succulent's face, Sebas understood that he had lost. His smile was that of a cruel hunter mocking his prey for falling into his trap. It was safe to assume that he had come after perfect preparations. In that sense, there was a good chance that Stefan was indeed a real civil servant. He most likely also had a plan prepared should Sebas refuse them. Then, at the very least, Sebas had to try and figure out his opponent's intentions.
I understand. I will deliver the news to the lady. Please wait there for a while. Of course, we'll wait.
But please make it quick. We don't have leisure for dallying.
Succulent smiled, and Stefan shrugged his shoulders.
Understood. Then, if you'll excuse me.
Sebas closed the cover and turned in the direction of Solution's room. But before that, he would have to tell Soare to go hide deeper inside. With the soldiers left out by the door, the two people who were guided inside, Stefan and Succulent, each wore an astonished expression, seeing Solution. They had not expected to meet such a beauty. Stefan's expression slowly loosened, and his eyes traveled back and forth between face and chest. He swallowed his saliva, eyes filling with lust. On the other hand, Succulent's face gradually grew hard. To Sebas it became obvious who he needed to be vigilant of. He offered the two the sofa opposite Solution. Solution, who was already sitting, and Stefan, who was just seated, Succulent introduced them all.
So, just what exactly is going on?
At Solution's question, Stefan faked a cough as he spoke.
According to a report from a certain store, apparently a certain individual dragged away their employee. As he did so, the individual unduly handed over money to a different employee. Buying slaves is outlawed in our country. Don't you think what this person did was illegal?
Stefan's shoulders grew increasingly tense, as if he was slowly becoming angry. Solution replied in a bored voice.
Is that so?
The attitude behind her response left the two men blinking. For the fact that they were applying pressure, her behavior was completely unexpected.
I leave all complicated matters to Sebas. Sebas, take care of the rest.
Are you fine with that? Depending on how it turns out, you may be branded as a criminal.
My, how scary. Sebas, if it seems likely that I will become a criminal, then do tell me. Then, everyone, I bid you well. Solution said her goodbyes and left them with a bright smile. No one could say anything to her as she left the room. The power of the smile of a beautiful woman was confirmed in that moment. Before the sound of the door closing could ring out, they heard the astonished voices of the soldiers, seeing Solution.
"Then I will listen to what you have to say in her place."
Sebas smiled and took a seat in front of the two men. Stefan's behavior was awkward, still entranced by the memory of that smile. However, as if to cover for him, Succulent broke in.
All right, then mind if I ask you some questions? Like you've heard from Mr. Heavish at the door, our employee has gone missing, you see. I interrogated a certain someone, and he says that he handed her over after receiving money. Though I don't even want to imagine one of our employees doing something like that, I had no choice but to call the authorities.
"That's right. A dirty crime like slave trading will not be tolerated."
Heavish slammed down on the table.
"That's why Mr. Succulent here, who called it in without fearing for the store's reputation, is quite the exemplary citizen."
"Thank you, Mr. Heavish." Succulent lowered his head to Stefan, who was speaking with such enthusiasm that he was spitting at the mouth.
"What is with these theatrics?"
Thinking so in his head, Sebas began to ponder. The two men in front of him were definitely working together. Then, without a doubt, they made thorough preparations before commencing their attack. As such, his defeat was certain. The question then was how to minimize the losses. And on the flip side, what was Sebas's condition to emerge victorious in this situation? The victory condition for Nazarik's butler, Sebas, was to solve this problem without drawing further attention. It was not to protect Soiree. However,
"I suspect that the man who claims to have received money could be lying. Where is he now?" "He's been arrested for dealing in slavery, and is currently locked up in a cell. And the result from his testimony and our careful investigation is
that the one who purchased our employee is you, Mr. Sebas."
It meant that the man was caught and had confessed to everything. There was a good chance that he was pressured to change his testimony so that it would benefit them. Sebas was torn between whether to feign ignorance, lie, or deny it outright. What if he said that she wasn't in the residence? What if he said that he had killed her? Countless ideas ran through his mind, but the possibility of them working was low. They would not retreat so easily. Though before that he had to know one thing.
"But how did you come to the conclusion that it was me? Where is your proof?"
That was the part Sebas could not figure out. As long as he did not leave behind anything that could reveal his name or identity, there should not have been any evidence. Then how did they figure out this location? He had always been careful about being followed when he was outside. He had trouble believing that anyone who could tail him existed in this city.
The scroll.
A flash ran through Sebas's mind. The scroll that he bought from the Magician's Guild. That scroll was definitely different from others in its impressive craftwork. Someone who knew what he looked at would recognize that scroll was bought at the Magician's Guild. Then they could trace his steps and glean something out of it. A person dressed as a butler carrying a scroll would be that much more conspicuous. Even so, it was still not enough to place Soiree in his residence. He could argue that it was just someone who looked similar. The problem would be that things would get more complicated if they were to search the mansion. That's right. They would be forced to admit that including Soiree, only 3 people were living in this large mansion. Sebas resigned himself.
"It's true that I brought the girl here with me. However, at the time the girl was severely injured and on the verge of death. I had no choice but to take her." "In other words, you admit that you used money to trade for the girl?"
"Before that,
May I speak with the man you arrested? Unfortunately, that will not be possible. We can't have you two matching your stories. Then
I do not mind if you listen to our conversation. As he was about to say so, Sebas closed his mouth. In the end, this was a race that would have been planned beforehand. There was little chance that the situation would improve if he were to go to where the man was. Going on the offensive from this angle would only be a waste of time.
Then are you admitting to the fact that the girl was indeed a victim of those horrible injuries? From the government's perspective, I feel that this would be considered worse.
The work in our shop is very difficult. It can't be helped if she were to get injured. You see that often in the mines and such. It's the same.
I do not think that the injuries you're talking about and hers are the same.
It's the entertainment business, but we get a lot of different customers. We try to be careful, though. Well, I understand your point, Mr. Sebas. We will be a little more careful in the future.
A little?
Well, yes. Any more and it costs money, here and there.
At Sebas's question, Succulent wore a mocking smile, the kind where only the corners of the lips curl upwards. Sebas, too, responded with a smile.
Enough.
Stefan sighed deeply, like he was dealing with an idiot.
My duty is to check whether or not there was a transaction involving slaves. Checking on how workers are treated is for someone else. It seems that this incident was not connected to slavery. Then could you tell me the name of the civil servant who is in charge of the working conditions? I'd like to tell you, but it's complicated. Unfortunately, someone who interferes with another's work isn't very popular. Then please wait until then.
Stefan grinned, as if he were waiting for those words.
I wish I could do that. I really do. But since the report has already been made, I have to arrest you people and investigate as soon as possible, by force if necessary.
In other words, he had no time.
Even now, looking at the circumstantial evidence, it's obvious that you're guilty. But the store wants to resolve the matter cleanly. Of course, there will have to be compensation depending on the agreement, and it'll also be a little costly to destroy the false written report about the slave trading.
What is the breakdown, exactly?
Well, you see, we're going to need you to return our employee to us along with compensation for the profit lost during the time she was away.
I see. And how much would that be?
In gold coins, let's see here. Well, I'll give you a discount. 100 gold pieces, and an additional 300 for compensation, making it 400 in total. How's that?
Quite a fortune. How is that broken up? What type of work does she do on a given day? How much of it?
At that moment, Stefan interrupted him.
Wait a minute. That shouldn't be all of it, Mr. Succulent.
Oh, quite so. I almost forgot. You mentioned that since a report has been filed, destroying the entry will require a fee, even if we reach a settlement.
Of course, Mr. Succulent. You can't forget that part.
Stefan grinned.
But... No, it's nothing.
Sebas swallowed his words and smiled. Succulent bowed his head to Stefan and continued his talk.
I do apologize for that, Mr. Heavish. Anyways, the fee will be a third of the compensation, so 100 pieces. In total, that will come out to 500.
I paid money back when I brought her here. Is that part included as well?
What are you saying? Listen here, from the moment you agreed, you never bought a slave. In other words, the money involved in that transaction never existed. You probably dropped it somewhere.
Did he expect Sebas to simply pretend that he had dropped 100 gold pieces? Well, they most likely already each took half of it.
However, the girl's body is still not completely healed. If you try to take her now, she may suffer a relapse. There is also a chance that she may lose her life in the treatments to follow. I believe that it would be safer for her to stay with us in the time being.
Succulent's eyes glinted oddly. Noticing this change, Sebas knew that he had made a mistake. He had revealed that Soiree was important to him. Of course, you're right. If she died, then you would obviously have to compensate us. How about you lend us the lady of this house until her treatment is finished?
Oh, that's a splendid idea. It goes without saying that he should plug up the hole that he's responsible for.
The smile covering Stefan's face was clearly filled with lust. He was probably already undressing Solution in his mind. Sebas's smile disappeared and his face became expressionless. Although Succulent was probably joking, he would no doubt push for the idea if Sebas were to show a weak spot. From the moment that the fact he valued Soiree was revealed, the possibility of this troublesome incident growing bigger in the future was right before his eyes.
Won't excessive greed lead to trouble?
Ridiculous! Stefan's face became dyed red as he shouted loudly.
Like a pig to the slaughter.
Thinking so in his head, Sebas wordlessly watched Stefan.
What do you mean, greedy? This is all born from a heart that only wishes to safeguard the laws established by the esteemed Princess Renaer. How dare you be so disrespectful? Now, calm down, Mr. Heavish.
As soon as Succulent intervened, the screaming Stefan immediately controlled his temper. The sudden change suggested that his previous anger was not genuine, only a ploy to appear more threatening.
Even your acting is clumsy, Sebas thought in his head. But still, Mr. Succulent.
Mr. Heavish, since we already said everything we came here to say, how about we come back in 2 days to hear his reply? Will that be fine, Mr. Sebas?
Yes, I understand.
With that, the discussion was over. Sebas saw them out of the entrance. As the last to leave, Succulent smiled and said a few words more.
I should really thank that whore. I never expected for a merchandise that was about to be scrapped to lay this big of a golden egg. Or so a certain someone says.
Leaving those words behind, the door closed shut with a loud bang. Sebas continued to stare through the door, as if it was invisible. His face was calm, not showing any emotion in particular. However, something was clearly present deep within his pupils. It was anger. No, such a vague word does not accurately describe what he was feeling. Fury, wrath, they would have been more fitting. The reason Succulent showed his true intentions as he left was because he had blocked off all avenues of escape. Because Sebas had no way to respond, his own victory was certain.
Solution, show yourself.
In response to his voice, Solution emerged like water oozing out of shadow. She had used a skill from her assassin class to melt into the shadows.
I assume that you heard our discussion?
Sebas's words merely requested confirmation. Solution nodded her head, as if it didn't even need to be said.
So what are you planning to do, Sebas-sama?
He couldn't answer her question immediately. His lack of a reply drew an obviously cold gaze from Solution.
Will you hand over the human and be done with the matter?
I doubt that the problem will be solved that way.
Is that so?
If we were to show weakness, then they will come for more. They belong to that sort. The problem will not be solved, even if we were to hand Soiree over to them. The bigger problem is how much information they gleaned from investigating us. Although we came to the capital disguised as merchants, If they dig deeper and find the blind spot, they will know that our identities are fake.
Then what do you intend to do?
I do not know. I will go outside for a walk and think it over.
Sebas opened the front door and stepped outside. Solution silently watched as his back grew smaller in the distance. Absurd. If he had not brought that human with him, this series of incidents would never have occurred. That was all in the past, though. What was more important was what was to be done in the present and in the future. As Sebas's subordinate, she should not act arbitrarily while ignoring the words of her superior. However, it seemed that doing nothing and leaving this situation in his hands would be more dangerous.
If our youngest was here, if we moved as Pleiades, then we wouldn't have a problem.
She hesitated. She hesitated to a point where even she herself thought it excessive. Finally, she found her determination and opened her left hand. A scroll jumped out of it, as if rising to the surface of a pond. It was a scroll that she had been storing in her body until now. Currently, thanks to Demiurge's efforts, the day when mass production of low-rank scrolls would become possible was nearly at hand. However, that was not the case back when Solution had been deployed, and as such, this message scroll was given to her to be only used in emergencies. Solution had decided that the current situation required it. She opened the scroll and activated the magic contained within. Now used up, the scroll crumbled to ash and completely vanished by the time it touched the ground. In sync with the activation of the magic, Solution felt something like a string connecting her with her target and brought out her voice.
Lord Ainz?
Is this Solution? What is it? Seeing as how you were the one to contact me, is it an emergency?
Yes.
For an instant, Solution fell silent. That time was born from her thinking of her loyalty to Sebas, considering the possibility that it was all a misunderstanding. However, her loyalty to Ainz was stronger than everything else. And although they were always to act in the interests of Nazarick, of the 41 Supreme Beings, it could be said that Sebas's current situation was leading him to ignore this vital creed. For this reason, she opened her mouth to hear the judgment of her master.
There is a chance that Sebas-sama has betrayed us.
Huh? Wait, no way. Enough with your jokes, Solution. To utter such words without proof is inexcusable. You have proof?
Yes, although it is not enough to be called proof as such.